I'm James, 38, Major in the United States Air Force. I fly heavy-lift aircraft in hostile zones that most people can't find on a map. But at my father's golf club last Saturday, I was introduced as a skybound UPS driver with too much free time. It was a charity luncheon for my younger brother Evan. He just made partner at a corporate law firm downtown, and Dad decided it deserved a catered event on the 9th green. Crisp white tents, steak skewers, and a jazz trio that played songs no one really listened to. My mother beamed, my aunts gossiped, and I stood near the buffet table nursing a glass of soda, because champagne gave me migraines and I'd already had enough headaches for one day. I hadn't even been back in the States for 48 hours. The dust from my last mission was still in the lining of my boots, but no one asked about that. My father, a retired banker who believes prestige lives in business cards and club memberships, slapped a hand on my back with enough force to remind me who he thought the real man of the family was. He turned to one of his golf buddies and said, "This is my oldest. He drives the big boys. You know, military trucks with wings. They call him the air courier. Practically works for FedEx." Laughter followed, polite, stifled, but it landed right in my gut. That wasn't the first time he'd used that line. Probably wouldn't be the last. But the casual cruelty of it still had bite. Like being poked with the same stick you've learned to ignore, but every now and then it hits a nerve you forgot was still raw. It's not the words, really. It's what they stand for. The way he talks about Evan's cases like they're battles and makes my operations sound like joyrides. I once flew through enemy fire to pull out a unit pinned down near a collapsed bridge. But sure, let's call that package delivery with turbulence. I looked at the man he was talking to, some country club type with khaki pants and 2 white teeth. He chuckled and nodded without much interest. To him, I was just background noise. One more military son with vague duties and a handshake that didn't open deals. And yet, I said nothing. I smiled. The same tight-lipped smile I'd practiced for years. Because arguing with my father in public never ends well. Because no one really wants to hear that their dad thinks their career is a novelty. But inside, something moved. Just slightly. A tired flicker of that old familiar ache. Not because I needed his approval, not anymore. But because I knew what was coming next, and this time, I wouldn't be the one swallowing my pride. Not this time. Evan was the golden child, the one who never missed a step. My parents spoke his name like it was proof they'd done something right. Every family gathering turned into a celebration of his next milestone. New job, new house, new watch. My father's voice always carried that same pride, deep and booming, the kind that filled a room and left no space for anyone else. I used to think I could earn a sliver of that pride if I just worked harder. But the truth settled in quietly over the years. It wasn't about effort, it was about the image. Evan wore suits that fit perfectly. I wore a uniform that came with dirt and silence. He brought home glossy brochures of mergers and deals. I brought home scars and stories no one wanted to hear. At the dinner table, I'd try to chime in, maybe mention a training mission or a base transfer. The conversation would drift right past me, like wind over glass. My mother would smile politely, refill someone's wine, and change the subject to something lighter. My father would lean back and ask Evan about his latest client, his latest win, his latest anything. My words always hung there unfinished. I stopped trying after a while. It became easier to play the quiet one, the steady son who didn't need attention, the ghost in the family photo. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the window during those dinners, my own face slightly blurred by the glare, and think how fitting it looked, present but transparent. They meant no harm, I told myself. Maybe that made it worse. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being hated, it comes from being invisible. I learned to exist in the corners of their joy, to smile when everyone else was laughing, to fade out when the spotlight turned away. Over time, that invisibility hardened into something else. It became armor. The less they saw of me, the less they could wound. I told myself I didn't need to be seen, that my work, my mission, the lives I helped protect were enough. But deep down, in those quiet moments between flights, I still wondered what it might feel like to have my father look at me the way he looked at Evan, with pride instead of polite dismissal. That question stayed with me longer than I'd ever admit. It was the night after I got back from Kandahar. 48 hours ago, I was flying under blackout conditions in a region where the ground lit up with gunfire if you blinked the wrong way. I just pulled 3 injured soldiers out of a hot zone on the edge of a collapsing airfield, and now I was sitting in my childhood dining room, trying to find space for mashed potatoes between war stories no one asked for. Evan was already mid-monologue about a courtroom victory, something about a settlement, a high-profile client, and how he broke down the opposition's argument like it was the climax of a legal thriller. My father hung on every word, nodding like it was gospel. My mother refilled his glass without looking up, like it was muscle memory. No one noticed the scratches still healing across my knuckles. I waited for a pause, just a second of breath where I could slide in something small. I said I'd completed a night op. No details, just that we'd pulled through a tricky one, high-altitude extraction. My voice was steady, but I could already feel it dying on the table. My mother looked at me, smiled faintly, and said, "That's good, dear." Then she turned right back to Evan. She didn't even ask where it was. My father chuckled into his napkin and said something about me playing G.I. Joe in the sky. He meant it as a joke, but it landed with the same thud they always did. No one laughed, no one needed to. They'd heard that one before, and I'd heard enough to know I wasn't part of this story. That night, I stopped trying to make them proud. Not because I gave up on them, but because it was clearer than ever that I didn't exist to be understood. I existed to make things easier for everyone else. To stay quiet, to not interrupt the narrative. That was the script they'd handed me, and for a long time, I read my lines without protest. Until that dinner, when the silence between us got so loud, I started writing my own. It was supposed to be a standard pre-mission briefing, nothing classified. Just a high-level walkthrough with a visiting command team reviewing readiness for joint force coordination. I had walked into that room prepared, calm, and focused. Everything about my presentation was tight. Flight schedules, terrain maps, emergency protocols. This mission was mine, and I knew every inch of it. But then I noticed the glance. A small, subtle look was exchanged between 2 senior officers when my name was introduced. One of them, Colonel Briggs, leaned slightly to the other and murmured something. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. I'd seen that look before. It was the look of doubt. Later, I confirmed it. Someone from the liaison team had heard a conversation during the reception the night before. Briggs had been chatting with my father. My father, in his usual tone of casual arrogance, had referred to me as the air chauffeur. He even added that I was great at delivering crates, but not so sure about pressure. Those words would have rolled off me years ago, but in that context, they were more than insults. They were liabilities. Doubt spreads fast in high-stakes environments, especially when lives depend on your judgment. If someone up the chain believes you might crack, that suspicion follows you into the cockpit. I spent that whole night replaying it, not as a son, but as an officer. My father's ego hadn't just bruised mine. It had compromised operational confidence in a real mission. It had made a senior decision-maker hesitate. That was unacceptable. The hardest part was knowing I couldn't confront it directly. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about perception, trust. I knew what came next had to be surgical, clean, tactical. I had to erase that seed of doubt before it took root in the wrong place. I didn't need him to apologize. That ship had sailed long ago. What I needed was proof. Not for him, but for the people I was about to lead into one of the riskiest extractions we'd run in months. If they had even a sliver of uncertainty about me, that hesitation could cost lives. I wasn't about to let that happen, not because of a man who'd never once asked what I actually do. I started planning that night, not for a fight, for a demonstration. One that wouldn't just shut my father up, but would silence every whisper left in that room. Something clear. Immediate, impossible to ignore. I'd spent my life learning how to deliver under pressure. It was time to deliver something they'd never forget. The request had to be precise. Directive 16 wasn't something you pulled lightly. It authorized a visible, coordinated extraction exercise in a civilian area under the guise of operational readiness. It was typically reserved for public demos at military expos or high-level diplomatic visits, not golf courses. But protocol left a window open for command discretion, and I knew how to frame it. I laid it out clearly in my request. Key personnel present. Civilian misunderstanding affecting chain of command optics. Need for direct visual demonstration to restore confidence. The language wasn't emotional. It couldn't be. This wasn't about proving a point to my father. It was about proving a point to the people I'd have to trust with my life. I submitted the package just before midnight. The location, Edgewood Golf Club. Hole 9, civilian population, minimal, controlled, weather, clear skies, low wind. I included aerial approach routes, noise management plans, and rotor wash precautions. It looked clean on paper, just like I needed it to. I hit send and waited. The green light came at 0324, one word, approved. I was already up before dawn. My crew didn't ask questions. They knew the terrain and trusted the chain. For them, it was just another run, another exercise on the calendar. For me, it was everything. A single moment where two versions of my life would collide head-on. I arrived at the event in uniform, not dress blues. Flight gear. No one said anything, but I saw the looks. My father barely raised an eyebrow, too busy introducing Evan to the town's mayor. My mother smiled like she was afraid I might knock over a centerpiece. Evan just nodded, distracted by his reflection in a wine glass. I stood off to the side, eyes on the sky, hand resting near the comms device tucked in my pocket. When the signal came through, it was quiet, just a vibration. I tapped twice to confirm. ETA. 3 minutes. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The plan was in motion. And when it would hit like thunder. Not for revenge, not for drama, for clarity. For the kind of understanding no polite dinner conversation could ever create. Some truths don't belong in words, they belong in action. In sound and wind and presence. I was done trying to explain who I was. It was time to show them. It started with a low vibration in the soles of my feet. A subtle rhythm, like distant thunder, pulsing through the manicured grass. People around me glanced up from their wine glasses, eyebrows furrowed, confused. The quartet stopped playing. The mayor paused mid-toast. A breeze swept through the tents, lifting napkins and rustling tablecloths like a warning. Then it came into view. A C-47 Chinook, flanked by 2 Black Hawks, appeared over the ridge like beasts breaking through the clouds. Their formation was tight, deliberate, slicing the sky with surgical precision. The roar hit a second later. Not just sound, force. A wall of air that tore through the party like a hurricane. Glasses shattered. Plates spun off tables. Hats flew. Screams followed as guests ducked, grabbing hold of whatever they could. I stood still, right at the center of the lawn, flight boots grounded, helmet tucked under one arm, watching the panic swirl around me like I'd stepped into the eye of my own storm. The Black Hawks peeled off and hovered low, rotor wash flattening the grass and sending linen skimming across the green like paper. The Chinook descended slowly and heavily, steady as a heartbeat. Its ramp lowered midair, revealing my team lined up inside. Helmets on, visors down, perfectly still. I walked forward, calm, controlled. The sound didn't touch me now. It was mine. Every movement rehearsed, deliberate. My father stood frozen, his tie flapping wildly, one hand gripping a chair for balance. My mother's mouth was open, her hair whipped into chaos, her eyes locked on the descending steel. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a declaration. This is what I do. This is who I am. And no one at that party, not even my father, would ever mistake me for a courier again. My father didn't say a word. He stood there, his mouth slightly open, the edges of his blazer flapping in the downwash. The noise had faded now, but the silence that followed was louder than the engines. He didn't blink. He just stared, eyes fixed on the formation, on the ramp, on me. His face looked pale in the midday light. Not shocked, not angry, just hollow. Like he had finally come face to face with a truth he never believed existed. He wasn't looking at his son anymore. He was looking at something he couldn't label, couldn't dismiss, couldn't laugh off. The crowd had backed away, a wide ring of expensive suits and confused faces circling the center of the storm. I caught sight of Evan, his arms crossed tightly, his mouth pressed into a thin line. My mother's hand was on her chest, eyes darting between me and the machines behind me, as if trying to stitch the two images together and failing. Then he stepped forward. Colonel Rayburn. No rush, no drama. Just the authority that didn't need to be announced. He walked straight to my father, stopped 3 feet away, and extended a crisp white business card between 2 fingers. My father took it without looking, like a reflex. His eyes never left me. Colonel Rayburn's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He simply said, "Your son is the lead tactical commander for this unit. He's the reason they're still alive." Then he turned and walked away, his steps cutting through the stunned crowd like a blade through fog. Still, my father said nothing. He stood holding that small piece of cardstock like it weighed 100 pounds. His hand dropped slowly, and I saw his eyes shift. Not just from confusion, from understanding. It hit him then. Maybe not all of it, but enough. He finally saw what he'd refused to see for years. And for the first time in my life, the man who always had something to say didn't have a single word. And that silence was all I needed. I didn't stay to watch them clean up. I didn't linger to see if my father would speak. I walked straight to the waiting crew, strapped in, and was back in the air before the dust had even settled. By the time they finished dessert, I was halfway to base, already shifting into mission mode. The lawn, the stairs, the silence, they stayed behind me like smoke fading into blue sky. Weeks passed, then months. Operation Glacier Tide hit national news after we pulled out a stranded recon team from a mountain pass during a blizzard. Nothing in the coverage mentioned names. Just a single still shot of a pilot standing beside a Black Hawk, snow clinging to his visor like frost. The kind of image that says everything without needing context. The message came 2 days later. A simple text. "Your mom and I saw something about a rescue. Was that you?" I stared at the screen for a moment. Not long, just long enough to let the question breathe. Then I locked the phone and slid it face down on the desk. There was no anger, no bitterness, just calm. I didn't need to answer. Not anymore. Whatever he needed to know, he already knew. And whatever I needed from him, I'd already let go. Respect that has to be asked for never feels like respect at all. I had found mine, and it had nothing to do with him. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by the people who were supposed to see you first, you're not alone. Maybe it happened at the dinner table, in a meeting, or in a moment that should have been yours. If you've carried that silence and still showed up, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. This space is for us. For everyone who had to prove their worth in a world that refused to look up.